Greetings from the kingdom of the Son of God in beautiful sunny Orange County, California. You know, when you look at the Protestant Reformation and what came out of that, people like Martin Luther, Ulrich Zwingli, later John Calvin, John Knox, and many others. But although they got away from a very legalistic, theology-heavy religion like the Catholic Church, and they shed some of that baggage, they kept they still were very heavily theological and heavily layered in their theology. And both Catholicism and Protestantism, when you talk about traditional Protestantism, a lot of it is overthinking the room. Way too much theology, and it doesn't lend itself into practical kingdom Christian living. Out of the Protestant Reformation, and what people call the magisterial Protestants, like the Ulrich Zwinglis of the world, John Knox, Calvin, Luther, Philip Melanchthon, their theologies were very detailed. Came what they call the radical reformers, the Anabaptists. And I always said the Anabaptists were the closest to how I believe the apostles taught and lived out their faith. Now, most Anabaptists, although Trinitarian, did believe that the Nicene Creed was a departure from the heart of Christianity. They felt that there was too much emphasis on the Christology of Christ, not enough on his teachings. Thankfully, there were Anabaptists like Adam Pastor that embraced Jesus as being the Son of God and not God. So there were Unitarian Anabaptists, so we'd call dynamic monarchy Anabaptists. But nonetheless, often movements like that start off great, over time start to lose their zeal, maybe get away from pure doctrine and get into theology and complications and convolutions of theology. And, I'm subscribed to this podcast called Anabaptist Perspectives. And what you see now with the Anabaptists is, as I wrote in the title, overthinking the room. Overthinking the room. Anabaptism was always rooted in the Sermon on the Mount. And if you look at their famous Schleitheim Confession, it's very, I don't like to say simple, but it's very just pointed, brief, concise, not long-winded. But in watching that podcast and watching and dealing with Anabaptists over the last several years, whether it's from the Mennonite churches or, you have different Anabaptist types. And then you have you have everything from liberal to very traditional, conservative, legalistic Anabaptists. Amish are descendants of them. And then you have neo-Anabaptists, very liberal. And then you have the ones in between that are more balanced but nonetheless, what I noticed from them, they're starting to get into now a Protestant mindset of theology where it has to be very layered and complicated. So now you have Anabaptists, and the reason what inspired this whole little live stream was the fact that there's now Anabaptists that are embracing dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is an example of convoluted and complicated theology. The very thing that Anabaptism rejected. Now, don't get me wrong, because the original Anabaptists of the Protestant Reformation were very learned men. When I say that they're not into this complicated theology, it doesn't mean that Anabaptists were a bunch of rubes, and they were very intelligent. They were very learned, in the Greek and the Hebrew, in Latin. But as far as how they understood the faith and propagated the faith, it was in its simplicity, as Paul the apostle talks about in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2. And now I'm seeing Anabaptists are starting to say, well, dispensationalism and premillennialism, and they're getting into all this, they're touching ground on all this complicated theology. Anabaptism does not gel with dispensationalism. And this is the poison of modern institutional and non-institutional Christianity. And it's a plague. And this is why, at the end of the day, friends, I don't think no denomination or non-denomination is following Christ. I'm not talking about specific individuals. I'm talking about the actual denominations or the institutions. So I'll say this. These denominations come, they rise up, they start off good like the Anabaptists. And then eventually they lose their distinctiveness and take on the Christian culture around them, where it becomes about these complicated theologies, systematic theology, instead of pure doctrine, living out the kingdom Christian teachings of Christ. And more than ever, I just see that it's just about living for the kingdom. Eschew the labels. Anyways, hail Christ, hail victory.